Welcome to another episode of Art Matters with Wayne Quackenbush. I'm Wayne Quackenbush, the president of Portsmouth Arts Guild, and I also have a space in Newport where I show local artists. As we've established, the Portsmouth Arts Guild is dedicated to supporting all the arts, and today we have two special guests kind of covering a history lesson of what the Guild means and does in the community today. We have as our first guest Elizabeth O'Connell. She's a watercolorist and painter and teacher. And Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Wayne.
You're not originally from Rhode Island, we just established, and so you want to tell us a little bit about your experience and your journey to Portsmouth and Rhode Island?
Well, I moved to Rhode Island in 1973 from New Hampshire, and I consider myself a Rhode Islander now, even though I'm very still fond of New Hampshire and return there a lot. I love the Rhode Island state. I think of it as the estuary state, and it's close to everything that I love and tuned in to a lot of the exciting things in the art world.
Yes, I know. We're kind of lucky being kind of halfway between both New York City and Boston. Now, you've been teaching at the Guild for a number of years now. Do you want to talk about how you got involved with that?
Well, originally I lived in Portsmouth, and I believe I took a few classes here back in the day, but I was a weaver back then. A friend who is a member of Portsmouth Art Guild, Martha Antaya, invited me to teach at the Guild. She recommended my work. She had seen my work. And after that I was hooked. I love teaching. I have background in education, so I know how to break things down, what's going to hold up a process. So I think in that way I'm a good teacher. But I also love art. So
what's your background? Did you go to school for art? Have you had a lifelong interest?
Yes, I went to school in Boston. Garland Junior College was a college. It's no longer there, but it had an arts component, and I graduated from there with a degree in graphics design. I loved art from when I was little, and I loved nature, so both of those combine in many of my paintings.
Now, you were telling me that you've been teaching classes where you use actual natural subjects and teach almost scientific illustration style of art. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that works?
Well, I love to teach art using real objects, not photographs. And this summer I did a class for children where we focused on different habitats, and I brought in live creatures and plants from different habitats. For instance, Rhode Island's the ocean state, so we began with ocean creatures like fiddler crabs, snails, what else did we get? Fish, and brought in aquariums, and the children were able to observe and draw them and illustrate them with watercolors and colored pencils. Another fun habitat was the meadow, where we had butterflies, caterpillars that were changing into pupa, and plants such as milkweed and some of the plants that grow in the meadow, flowers. So every week was a different adventure for the children.
And these are all living creatures, and they were able to deal with them moving around and things like that?
They were amazing. I think children are born artists.
Yes,
and,
absolutely.
They not one of them said, but they're moving. they just jumped right in. We had leopard frogs, which, as you know, are really quick-moving creatures.
And active, yes. Mhm.
And some of the art I have from that class is just amazing. One was a 5-year-old boy, and he did one of the best paintings I've ever seen of a frog.
It's all natural, and you teach adults too. You have a range of age groups that you work with. Now I know you brought in some paintings. Did you want to start by showing one of the
Sure.
paintings and talking about it?
Well, I brought in two real paintings, and this one is a finished painting from a class that I was doing with adults.
Mm-hmm.
And I showed them from beginning to end how to sketch the pears and how to do an underpainting and then how to layer colors on top. So Bartlett pears. And
So you start from light and you build up the color to get the dark. So highlights to shadows is
Exactly
the
right.
traditional way of working with watercolors.
but it's important to let the water carry the paint as well. This was a combination of two techniques that I like to use, which one is called wet on wet, which means wet paint on wet paper. And the second one is wet on dry, which means wet paint on dry paper.
Right.
And you get a different effect from that. If you want a flowing, loose look,
You get your happy accidents that way
yes,
sometimes.
yes. If you want a flowing, loose look, you use the wet on wet. But some people spray their paper and wet the whole paper. I never do that.
Yeah.
I put the wet water where I want it, and I gently add color to have the intensity build up.
Now, did you want to give us a small demonstration
Sure.
of what you can do, and then maybe we'll get to have time for another painting.
Okay.
You are also working with the cooperative in Warren as well,
Yes.
and you're active in different art communities. So let's see what happens when you put some paint to paper.
All right. Well, I brought in a palette like I would use with artists, and usually I work with, when students are just beginning, with what is called a limited palette, so that they don't get overwhelmed with too many colors. So before I came in today, I put a little bit of this color here, and it's already dried. And the nice thing about watercolor is that
You can bring them back to life
exactly right. You
by
can
just adding water.
just add water, and that's what my little spray bottle's for.
Yep.
I'm adding water right now, and there's like a puddle of water on top of the paint, which is kind of cool because I can get a variety of hues from that. So now I'm going to just put some of this. This is cerulean blue.
Ah, cerulean, that's the color of the sky and the water.
Right, it's the color of this table. And I'll put a little bit of spray of water on it. And
It's very
sometimes I
important.
put water right in the center.
Yep, that's
So-
to draw from for mixing.
So I'm going to demonstrate right now how to do wet on wet and wet on dry, and show you the different effects you can get. So I'm just putting some water on
And this
the
would be the
paper.
wet on wet, so you wet the paper.
Yeah. And the paint is only going to go where I've put the water. It's not going to go anywhere else.
Gravity's
So,
helping you in this one too.
yes, well, I can move it around.
Yep.
So I'm going to add a little bit of this alizarin crimson to show you how quickly it moves.
Yes.
Isn't that cool? And it has a feathery look to it.
Because the actual texture of the paper is helping you move the paint, and it's also providing you a range of tone there.
Well, if I want more hue, I can bend the paper.
Right.
But usually I work perfectly flat.
Yes.
You can control it a little bit more.
For demonstration purposes, obviously, for the camera, you need to.
All right, so see, it's moving around. Of course, if I were working flat, it wouldn't be moving around, but I love the way it's moving around. But you see, it's not really moving past where the water is. Now, I'm going to show you wet on dry.
And that's when you
And I'm going to use a slimmer brush for that.
use the color directly, the pigment directly from your palette and apply it to the dry paper.
Right, watch how careful I can draw.
Right, and that's for your fine technique and dry brush, I think.
And it's not moving.
Right, and that color will stay there and define your form.
So if I wanted to do the painting here, I might use the wet on wet for part of the pear, but when I get to the detail, like in the inside of the pear, I would wait for the paper to dry and add my color on top of that and be able to control it perfectly. And if I make a mistake, you're talking about some of the little tricks of the trade. If I make a mistake, I can do one of two things. I can use paper towel to soak it up, like that. Or I can use a little bit of water and what I call the scrub brush. It's kind of a stiff but squished out brush. Okay, let's say I want to get rid of this. This doesn't work for me. I'm going to just scrub it out of there. So a lot of people will say, oh, watercolor, it's an unforgiving medium if you can't make mistakes. And I disagree with them there. You can do a variety of things to fix a mistake.
Now, back in the day, I would even try to use bleach to take stuff out, and you can actually take a blade, like a razor blade or an X-Acto knife, and scratch into the surface. I know there's all sorts of things you can do to get different textures. You can add put salt on your paper.
That's true. I like pretty much the traditional techniques, though. And the paper that I use it's called cold pressed paper. And there are different weights of paper. I prefer 140 pound.
Right.
Because it absorbs the paint faster. And it dries faster as well.
Now, do you use a block or do you stretch the paper yourself?
I use a block, and for that reason I don't need an easel. I can just use the block of paper and paint directly on it because it's attached with tape to the block. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of red to this blue.
We're getting down to the last half of a minute, so if you have any parting words, we can talk about that.
Well, I have one more painting I'm going to show you.
Okay.
This one took a long time. I did it in the winter when the Loof carousel in Riverside was closed for the winter, so there was no heat. So I went about 5 different times to sketch and paint the horse and the dragon and some of the inside of the Loof.
So you actually did that as a plein air?
Yes, I did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that about wraps up our time here today, Elizabeth. I really appreciate you coming down, and
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you more around the Guild. Thank you.
I love teaching, and I hope people come to the Guild and take a class.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, here we are back at Art Matters with Wayne Quackenbush, and today we have a very special guest. This is MARILYN Moriarty, who is one of the original founders of the Portsmouth Arts Guild, which I know occurred more than 15 years ago. And MARILYN, you have a fabulous story about how the Guild was started and what you saw as the need for the community, and I wondered if you could share that with us.
Oh, I'd be delighted. I It's something very close to my heart. My husband was born and raised here in Portsmouth, and as I said, Headley Street was the family name before his mother remarried. But anyway, I was having breakfast with Eileen Shanley one morning at Foodworks, and I said to Eileen, I said, you know, I've been to Newport, I've been to Fall River, I've been to Providence. There's all these wonderful art museums and wonderful art. I said, why isn't there anything in Portsmouth? I said, Portsmouth is such a beautiful area between the water and there's the variety. I said, there's got to be a lot of artists around here. Why isn't there something that can be available to them? And she said, well, why don't you do something about that? And I said, okay, I will. And so we got up from breakfast and we went over to the town hall, and I found out about a piece of property that there was an empty building in it. And anyway, that's how we got started. And Eileen, having been here all of her life, she was one of the original families here. She called people. I didn't know anybody. I was living in Pennsylvania at the time. And my sons, two of my sons have businesses here, so they knew people. But anyway, our first meeting Chris Perkins lived here, Dr. Perkins' daughter, and she knew a lot of people. So between the three of us, we gathered up names and started making phone calls and spread the word. And we had the most wonderful group of people that gathered together. The very first meeting was at Eileen Shanley's house. After that, we had no place to go. We went to the Historical Society. We filled up it with chairs and people. It was delightful. More people got the word, started coming. Make a long story short, we founded this Portsmouth Arts Guild, and it took us a while, but in a small town, word spreads quickly.
Yes.
So one of our guests, I should say, or one of the members, was a priest from the Abbey, Father Christopher. And he said, well, we didn't know where we were going to go.
Now that would be Portsmouth Abbey, which is the prep school.
Yes. And so he said, well, he was a photographer and a poet. I couldn't believe the depth and the variety of the artistic people in this little town. We had sculptors, we had photographers, we had potters, we had painters of all medium. So anyway, he said, why don't we have our first show at the Portsmouth Abbey? I said, wonderful idea. So we had the privilege of being in this wonderful receiving room that had a sunken pond in the middle, Greek columns. Oh, it was so exciting. Would you believe by the end of that weekend, I counted the names on the guest book of the people that came. Over 350 people showed up for that first opening.
That's pretty
amazing. So it was a miracle as far as I was concerned.
And you saw it as fulfilling a need for the town, and I know that Eileen Shanley was an artist, and the Guild still gives a scholarship out to a deserving Portsmouth High School student in her name.
This is wonderful.
And Chris Perkins I know her as a sculptor.
Yes, she is.
She recently, I think, moved back to Portsmouth. And how many artists do you think were participating when you got things going?
Well, you know, I was shocked. When the first meeting, we had almost 10, 12 people there. Mm-hmm. The second meeting was more. And then we started having meetings wherever we could have a meeting, inside people's homes and different places. And I would say we had a good 100 and some people the first year. They came from all over, from Tiverton, from Little Compton, Fall River. I think it was the newness of it that attracted the people, and also the variety. We had a nice variety of talent to offer the community, I believe, between poets. In fact, that first show at the Portsmouth Abbey, there was a band that joined us. There was a sculptor who had a 6-foot giant giraffe. We fitted it into the room. It was lovely. And of course, Chris is a very good sculptor. She had her work. We had a man who played the didgeridoo. That is an instrument from Australia.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
It was fascinating. He performed. Father Christopher read his poetry. It was just a delightful weekend that was a permanent memory.
Now we still do spoken word events at the Guild, and we still fluctuate around that number of members. I think that the Guild acquired the current gallery at 2679 East Main Road. We rented from the Episcopal Church, and I think that gallery may have been acquired maybe 2003, which is when the Guild acquired its nonprofit status as well.
Yes. Eric
Brody. Yes.
I think he was involved in
He was a
making
president.
those arrangements.
There have been a few
Yes.
presidents before my time.
Yes. And
we need to.
we just kept growing and growing.
And I think that we were talking earlier about how you were fulfilling a need for the community, but you expanded beyond the realm of Portsmouth, and I'm kind of doing the same thing in that we have members from New Bedford and Fall River and Providence and as far away as Connecticut.
Wonderful.
Pawcatuck, I think. So we want to encourage everybody to be involved as much as possible, and
it's a learning process when you're a member.
And we were talking about the purpose of art in people's lives and how it expands people's horizons and their minds, and
it's soul food.
It makes the connection between people
Yes.
stronger, and it's a welcoming experience. And
It is
these
indeed.
times when things can be kind of fearful, we kind of want people to be connected and welcome. Now, we need to show some of your artwork, so
Okay.
we can start with that and continue to talk. And I know that the first piece you wanted to show was your very first watercolor that you did in college, which I'll help you get that up
Thank
there.
you. Yes, this I did when I was a freshman in college, and I was kind of a free spirit, and I like to experiment, and I thought this was a major mistake. But when I look at it now, I realize I appreciate the freedom with which I was expressing myself.
Well, it's very bold. I see a lot of dry brush happening, very direct. There's not a lot of editing happening. I mean, it's a very strong piece.
I think I was under pressure to get it done.
So yeah, the deadlines seem to help
Right.
help a lot
Right.
of artists get their stuff done.
Well, thank you.
And
Well, then I continued with the standard watercolor. I graduated from college, got married, had 5 children, but continued to paint and exhibit locally in Pennsylvania. And then I started to get bored with just watercolor and watching it move and experiment with color. And I started experimenting by...
now hold that up so that it's
excuse me.
perpendicular.
I started experimenting with it as a ripping up rice paper. I went from regular watercolor paper to rice paper. I would paint strips of paper. I'd have an image in my mind, and then I put it together with different strips of paper, and I used some pencil. It's basically a mixed media. But I had so much fun, and I really enjoyed it, and I said, I'm going to do more of this and explore it, because I had never done anything like that before. So with that in mind, I
went to larger works.
Yes, I went. Yes, bigger and better. This is I was using the rice paper, but I found I enjoyed crushing it and twisting it and turning it. And I don't know if you can see that, but the camera can see it.
So that's almost a sculpture then. What's the title of this piece now?
This is called, oh dear, I can't remember now.
Oh, that's okay. So you crushed up paper.
It's called Riptide Roses.
There you go.
Riptide Roses. My husband used to, when he'd go to the store or something, he'd bring home flowers or whatever was on sale that day. And I was delighted. He had brought the roses home, and I had them in the vase, and I started painting them. And about a week after that, we went to the neurologist, and we saw the brain scan, and we found out my husband had Alzheimer's. And the anger that I felt I felt I was being crushed, and I couldn't get out of where I was at in my life. So that's when I started doing this Riptide effect, and I was making a statement about joy and difficulty at the same time.
Yes, there's a lot of beauty there, but there's also a lot of turmoil.
Yes, a lot of turmoil. I didn't know which way to turn. I knew what we had ahead of us, but it was my immediate reaction at that time. And then this was before, actually, I did this one.
But this is a piece that incorporates a lot of the different things that you've been talking about and experimenting with all in one place.
Indeed, that's
Yes.
exactly right. This is on regular watercolor paper. I don't know if you could see this, but I call this just plain matter that has not had life yet. It's all pencil work in the background. And if you'll notice, there's an egg shape here, which to me is the beginning of all life. And the egg, as you can see, is cracked at that one point where life begins. And I believe in the Spirit of God, and the Spirit of God comes into the shell and gives life to whatever, and it goes on from there. Now you notice I have the universe. Can you see the stars and the design in the egg itself?
Yes.
So I was incorporating all sorts of life, including the presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives. So I just enjoyed that, and as you can see, the paper is crushed, and it was much more three-dimensional. Over the years, the paper, of course, through moisture and all, does not stand up the way it used to. But this is kind of right from my heart. It was an image I had, and I just had to do it.
It's very gentle and very strong all at the same time. You capture the whole world and the whole universe in one painting, so that's pretty unique unto itself.
It's quite a challenge,
So,
I agree.
So we were also talking earlier about people's approach to art, and I've always found myself kind of in the middle of art, and it's a big part of my life. Do you find that maybe people generally are a little timid or afraid of art?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. I would love to teach a class and how to appreciate art and how to enjoy it. I taught art theory. For 26 years, I taught art history, and I also ran the art program in the school where I was teaching. So I would love to be able to do that, because it's like myself, when I go to a concert, I wish I knew more about music.
Sure.
Because I want to enjoy it fully.
So, Marilyn, we're about out of time, and I really appreciate you coming down today, and thank you for sharing your work with us, and that wraps up
It certainly-
another episode of
It was
Art Matters.
my privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.